CAD, it's Maximus here. Can't believe I haven't made a video about this tool. This is a not perfect example of a Makita 9031 1 1/8 inch or 30 millimeter by 21 inch, or I should say 30 by 530 or 1 1/8 inch by 21 inch. Belts aren't the easiest to find, but as the title says, these tools, I think due to the rarity of them and not everybody makes what's known as band files, sometimes known as finger files when they're the really thin, narrow ones that use like the 3/8 or 1/2 inch belts. This one's just a little bit beefier, made for just a little bit bigger jobs, a little bit higher removal rates. I digress. The average online price is $370, and it's because they're one of the few power tool companies that are making ones of this size. Actually, Harbor Freight, even in their Bauer for the finger file, the 1/2 inch wide version, they only want $55, but there is a caveat to many other manufacturers' versions versus Makita's. Makita's, these are custom built or custom engineered tools to be a band file, where many of them is simply an accessory onto an angle grinder. And the reason that's an issue is because you gain a lot of extra weight when it's an accessory that already bolts to an angle grinder rather than being an little integrated unit like this. I got this at an interesting shop sale. It was actually a cabinet shop that was going out of business. Kind of an interesting cabinet shop. I think it was kind of an oddball, maybe semi-private cabinet shop, because they had a lot of oddball equipment and tools. And surprisingly enough, it wasn't actually where the cabinet shop was. It was a tool sale at a church when you went in. So what appeared is that some guy had a cabinet shop, maybe had a couple of employees, but it was more like custom work. And then apparently what it appeared is that he had passed away and just donated the shop to the church. And so it was kind of like a benefit to the church sale. I didn't buy many items from there, but I did pick up this Makita 9031. Back to that outrageous price, you have to be careful. There are some cheaper ones, but what people have done is seen the outrageous amount of money that they're charging for these retail, like Home Depot's $369, as they're importing a bunch of 100-volt ones from Japan. As you can see here for our little 9031, we just have all these outrageous prices, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that one's only $233, 100-volt. The reason that's an issue is that would actually work in North America. You know, a lot of the country does have 120 volt, but a lot of the country has 110 to 115, so it's not much of an over voltage, but it is enough to cause excessive wear to the motor's commutator, because there'll be excessive sparking, plus more risk to the variable speed system. It is true there's a tolerance level for voltages on electrical systems. There has to be due to the nature of the system. The same way when you construct something to take a certain load, like 100 pounds, you don't build it to where it would fail at 101 pounds. Kind of the same deal. So people get away with the 100-volt ones, but once again, it just ends up causing additional wear, mainly because you're applying a higher voltage than it's designed for, so you're actually getting a power boost out of it, but adding a lot more heat and even speed that it's not designed for. Anyway, these things are cool just because they're a little bit lighter weight. I don't have the side handle, which is like this. Actually, it's missing some kind of like insert right here. I don't know where the heck that went. Quick side note, if you ever see one of these used, it's a very interesting tension system to where just the amount of spring pressure will cause the belt to dive. And so you want to press on these and make sure. What often happens is this plunger rusts in there and then the thing is totally useless. So you make sure the plunger works. But it's a little funky because you kind of got to get in there, make sure you don't cut yourself at the edge of the belt. But you can just turn this little nut, not very much, and you can really get just a lot of movement for the tracking of the belt. Secondly, the belt tracking, once you get it set, it's pretty good. Actually, well, Cruise does have the option to hook a vacuum up to it, which is actually kind of appreciated. against a 5-amp motor. These are indeed made in Japan, so these, and this one's obviously much older. We can see, oh, not, is that 09 or is that 99? That looks like 99. So this unit is 25 years old, and they're still selling the same thing. And that's what I mean. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They don't sell enough of them to engineer a more modern one. And so instead, my cat's going to blare at me for no apparent reason. She has everything she ever wanted. So they just continue to sell these. There is one criticism about this, which is we have some of the air escaping through here, but a lot of the air is escaping through there. What can end up happening, and people have complained, is a lot of people are right-handed. They're kind of holding it like this, maybe getting their head a little bit closer just so you can see exactly where you're grinding or sanding at, and that this blows a bunch of the dust into your face. Not really that big of a deal, but you do need to be, I guess, watchful. And because it can suck in dust and end up, you know, I wish they probably should have made, it's kind of a difficult proposition. If they made a bunch of vents over here, it would promote a lot of dust to get stuck, get trapped in the belt, and then it builds up on the wheel. So these things are dusty, and there's always a kind of a compromise with their design. I don't know if you can really see here. There's a very steep concave on this drive hub wheel. Not hard to remove. It has these little thin flanges. You have to be careful. If you can see on this side where the flange has gotten real thin, where somebody has not paid much attention and allowed the belt to grind. But I kind of like this system versus having you know, another piece of metal that acts as like a wear plate, like belt, you know, big belt sanders have. Instead, they just rely on a flange on the wheel, which is a little bit easier to replace. And probably overall, having this aluminum wheel versus a guide plate means that this system is lighter weight. This belt's a touch narrow, but it is 1 1/8 inch. There was a 90/30, which is 1 3/16, which is such an oddball size that they stopped making that. And then Makita still has their true finger file, which is really narrow and 3/8 of an inch wide. The 1 1/8 by 21 is a pretty common size. A lot of the belts are sold specifically as for Makita. But they're, you know, because of the lower sales, they're disproportionately expensive. You're talking about $1 a belt, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize that you can get a 4-inch by 36-inch sanding belt, which I've bought for that Viver benchtop disc and belt sander thing. And it was $15 for 5 belts. So a 4-inch by 36-inch belt is $3 a piece, where a 1 1/8 by 21 is $1. But if you compare the amount of material, it makes these belts, you know, square inch per square inch, like 5 times more expensive. But of course, the whole deal with these, particularly, I was glad to have picked up this one versus the little finger file ones, because for me, something of this size is just going to be a lot more useful. And the whole purpose, obviously, of these is to get into some tight spaces. You know, so many times there's metal burrs from, you know, drilling holes in a tight space, or, you know, removing something from some kind of casing, and you still have, you know, burrs or a little stud that you need to get rid of. It's a challenge to figure out. It's hard to get angle grinders into tight spaces. Obviously, normal belt sanders, hand files. There's nothing is quite the same as having something about the size of your thumb, you know, about the same width, and a little bit less for the height there. But to be able to get that in there and sand and grind it away. Once you have one of these, you actually find quite a few situations where, and the reason they're called band files is where you'd normally use a file, or that would be the only available option, to now having something to where it's a power tool. And it saves you a lot of time and effort, and you can focus on being more careful. The side handle situation, I see why it's removed, is really kind of oddball on this, because it just had a metal plate with the side handle, and so you kind of drove it around, and that's why there's this gap and this wave washer on this bolt here. But most people took it off because it defeated the ability of the sander to really get into the tight spaces. Variable speed is handled by a little dial under the trigger or under the handle. I think that's a fine location for it, although some people online have complained, you know, as they're using this, it does have a trigger lock of, as they're using it, bumping it a little bit, although it's not such a big deal once again. And I should mention, actually has a surprising range of control, and that's one of the nice things about the Makita, is many variable speed tools like this, actually the issue is they won't go down low enough speed. They just have like a slight adjustment, but all at the kind of top end. This actually is pretty linear from very low speed all the way up to full power. So I'm not going to take this apart because I don't want to deal with the dust right now. And quite frankly, it's a pretty simple tool. We have an electric motor and one simple gear reduction. That's why this is lower than the center line of the motor, and it drives the bell. I mean, and that's the other thing about its price is, like, you know, for how simple a tool it is, it sure is expensive. But man, once you have one of these things, they're actually just an absolute lifesaver in a lot of situations. And surprisingly enough, people use these a lot. There are people who do, like, you know, chainsaw, wood carving, and all that kind of stuff. They use these types of tools. It's just a staple along with the chainsaw to do finish work and touch-up work. People even do entire carving operations using these types of band files. So anyway, blabbed and blabbed endlessly about this thing, but I think it's pretty cool. They're a pretty rare tool to actually ever find used, because not a lot of people do buy them, probably because of how outrageously expensive they are, and the fact that it's kind of a conceptual thing. I mean, on one forum post, which I thought was genius, is there's a lot of times where you have a broken or stripped out fastener, and you can't get an extractor on there, difficult to get a torch on there, so you're stuck trying to use like a hammer and a cold chisel to try to knock the head of the bolt off. Not enough space to get a drill in. What's interesting is one of these, if you can get this, I mean, you don't need much space just to get the edge of this roller on the top of a fastener. And surprisingly enough, you can use one of these to sand the head off a fastener in probably a minute or just a couple of minutes. And it's just one of the myriad of ways that these can be used. You're thinking, God, how am I going to get the head of that bolt off? And you're like, wait a minute, I have like a file thing. If I can get this on top of the head of the bolt, then I can just grind the head of the bolt off, and will reach in exponentially more restricted places than any kind of grinder or even torch. You're not worried about burning stuff up using torches or even plasma cutters, which is the other option I've heard, is if you got a bolt in a tight space that you can't get a torch into, the plasma cutter wands tend to be pretty small as well. Anyway, that's the Makita 9031 1/8 by 21 inch band file. Pretty cool tool. My recommendation is to find one used, because they last a very long time, and to be careful about running into the 100-volt Japanese versions that you'll run a big risk of burning up if you get them in North America. So, thanks for watching. See you next time.